The moment my brother's lawyer read the shareholder agreement, he stopped mid-sentence. The whole room went quiet. My brother was already smiling. He thought he'd won. He thought I'd handed him everything he ever wanted, and all it cost him was a signature. He was right about one thing. I did hand it to him. I just didn't tell him what came with it. Let me go back to the beginning, because none of this makes sense without it. My brother, I'll call him by what he always called himself, the smarter one, is 4 years older than me. Growing up, he was the one my parents pointed to when they wanted to show what ambition looked like. He tested well. He interviewed well. He could walk into a room full of strangers and leave with 3 business cards and 2 promises of follow-up calls. I was quieter. I studied harder. I didn't have his charm, but I had something else. I could read a contract the way some people read a novel. Every clause, every footnote, every comma that didn't belong. My father used to say I had a gift for seeing what wasn't there, what was missing, what had been left out on purpose. He died when I was 22. My father left behind a small manufacturing business. Nothing glamorous. Industrial parts, long-term supply contracts with 3 regional clients, a warehouse outside of Columbus. It wasn't worth millions, but it was stable. It had been stable for 19 years because my father ran it with the same discipline he applied to everything else in his life. He left it to both of us equally, 50-50. My brother was 30 at the time and had just left his 3rd job in 5 years. I was 22, had just finished my accounting degree, and had been doing the company books part-time for 2 summers. My mother asked us to keep it running. She didn't need the income. My father had been careful about that, but she said the business was the last thing that still felt like him. She wanted it to stay in the family. She wanted us to at least try. We tried. For the first 2 years, it actually worked. My brother handled sales and client relationships, which was genuinely where he was strongest. I handled operations, finances, compliance. We didn't agree on everything, but we had a rhythm. We had a system. Then he met his business partner. I won't use his name either. He came from money, had a finance background, and had a habit of speaking about other people's assets the way a contractor talks about a house that needs renovation. He looked at our little manufacturing company and saw inefficiency. He saw untapped value. He saw something that, with the right restructuring, could be flipped, or scaled, or sold. He started spending time with my brother. Long dinners, weekend trips. By month 3, my brother came to me with a proposal. He wanted to bring his partner in as a 3rd stakeholder, give him 15%, split equally from our shares, 7.5 each, in exchange for a capital injection and his strategic guidance. I said no. My brother pushed. He said I was being territorial. He said I was thinking small. He said our father built the company to last, but the world had changed, and sometimes lasting meant growing, and I wouldn't know that because I was 24 and had never worked anywhere else. I said no again. He said fine, but he started making decisions without me, started promising things to clients I hadn't approved, started talking to a bank about a line of credit using the company's contracts as collateral without my signature, which he needed, which he knew he needed, which he tried to get by sliding it into a stack of routine documents at 8 o'clock on a Thursday evening when I was tired. I caught it. He was angry in a way I had never seen before, not at being caught. At me, specifically. At the fact that I existed in a structure that required my agreement. He said I was the reason we couldn't move forward. He said I was holding the company hostage to my own fear. He said a lot of things that night that I have thought about many times since. I didn't respond to most of them. I just said we needed to talk to a lawyer before we did anything else. He left without answering. The next few months were the kind of slow that feels fast when you look back at it. Small decisions started getting made without me. Emails that ceceted me but didn't ask for my input. Suppliers being told things were under review. A new client contact being established, someone his partner knew, without going through our normal intake process. I documented everything, not because I knew where it was going, just because documentation was something I knew how to do. Then, about 8 months after that Thursday night, I got a letter. My brother was filing for a formal dissolution of the partnership. His lawyer argued that the 50-50 split had created an unworkable deadlock, that I had systematically obstructed business development, that the company's failure to grow constituted a breach of fiduciary duty on my part. He wanted the business, not half, the whole thing. He was offering to buy out my stake at book value, which, thanks to a particularly slow quarter he had largely engineered, was about 60% of what it would have been 18 months earlier. His lawyer was polished. He sent a long letter that was clearly designed to feel overwhelming. Lots of citations, lots of implication, lots of language that implied this was going to be expensive and public and damaging if I chose to fight it. My own lawyer called me the same evening. She had read the filing. She said, "This is aggressive." She said, "They're counting on you not having the resources for a long fight." She said, "We can counter this, but I want you to understand it will be difficult and it will take time." I told her I understood. Then I told her what I was thinking. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Are you sure?" I said yes. She said, "Walk me through it one more time." So I did. Here is what my brother's lawyer did not know. What his partner did not know. What my brother himself, despite 4 years of working alongside me, did not know, or had forgotten, or had never bothered to learn. When my father set up the shareholder agreement for the company, he used a lawyer who specialized in closely held family businesses. That lawyer had drafted a very specific set of provisions designed to protect the company in the event of a transfer of shares, any transfer including a forced buyout. One of those provisions was a deferred capital contribution clause. It meant that any party who acquired a controlling interest, more than 60%, was required to inject capital equal to 3 years of the company's average operating deficit. Our average operating deficit, calculated across the full life of the company including the early lean years, was not small. My father had always run the company conservatively, which meant the clause was based on a figure that reflected the hardest periods, not the recent stable ones. The clause also included an assumption of contingent liabilities, specifically 2 long-term maintenance obligations tied to equipment that my father had financed creatively in the early days. Those obligations were current. They were also not visible on a standard balance sheet read. You had to go to the footnotes. You had to know what you were looking for. I had been in those footnotes for 6 years. My brother's lawyer had done a review. His partner had done a review. Neither of them had flagged these provisions. Either they missed them, or they assumed they were too obscure to matter. Or, and this is what I believe, they assumed I would fight the dissolution aggressively enough that we would end up in a negotiated settlement and these clauses would never become operative. They did not expect me to concede. That was the part I didn't tell my own lawyer until the night before the filing deadline. I was going to consent to the dissolution. I was going to accept the buyout at the offered price. I was going to sign everything they put in front of me. And the moment my brother crossed 60% ownership, every single one of those provisions would activate automatically. My lawyer called it elegant. She also told me 3 times that she wanted me to be certain, because once I signed, there was no unwinding it. I was certain. The hearing was short. My brother's legal team had prepared for a fight and instead got a surrender. His lawyer was visibly off balance. He asked for a brief recess twice, which told me he was reading things more carefully than he had before, now that I was cooperating. My brother sat across the table and did not look at me directly. His partner sat beside him and looked like a man who had ordered a meal and was waiting for a catch. When I signed the final document transferring my shares, my brother exhaled. It was a small sound, barely audible, but I heard it. It was the sound of someone who had been holding tension for 8 months, finally letting it go. His lawyer gathered the documents. He flipped to the shareholder agreement attachment, standard practice, confirming all operative provisions. He started reading. He stopped at page 11. I watched his face change, not dramatically, just a shift around the eyes, a stillness in the jaw. The particular stillness of someone doing rapid mental arithmetic and not liking the result. He asked for another recess. My brother looked at him. Then he looked at me for the first time since we'd sat down. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. In the recess, my lawyer told me later, his lawyer had explained the provisions to him, the deferred capital contribution, the contingent liability assumption, the timeline for both, which was 60 days from the triggering transfer. meaning my brother had 2 months to either inject the capital or find a buyer for a stake that now came with significant strings attached. When they came back to the table, the energy was different. His lawyer spoke carefully. He said there appeared to be some provisions in the shareholder agreement that warranted further review. He asked whether I would consider delaying the finalization of the transfer. I looked at my own lawyer. She looked at me. I said, I thought this was what everyone wanted. He said, yes, but in light of certain clauses. I said the clauses were always there. They were drafted by my father's attorney. They've been in the agreement since the company was incorporated. Nothing has changed. My brother said my name. Just my name, nothing else. I looked at him. This was the person who had slid a loan document into a stack of papers at 8 o'clock on a Thursday night. This was the person who had spent 8 months telling suppliers and clients that I was the problem. This was the person who had hired a lawyer to describe me as a bad faith partner in a formal legal filing. I said, I'm not trying to hurt you. I never was, but I'm also not going to pretend these provisions don't exist. His partner leaned forward and said something about renegotiating terms, about finding a structure that worked for everyone. I said, I'm open to a conversation, but I won't be doing it today. I picked up my copy of the documents. I thanked the mediator. I thanked the lawyers. I walked out. My mother called me that evening. She had heard from my brother. She was upset, not at me exactly, but in the way that mothers get upset when the thing they most feared comes true, even if they understand why. She said, I just wanted you two to keep it going. That's all I ever wanted. I said, I know. She said, he was wrong to do what he did. I know that, but you're his sister. I said, I know that too. She asked if there was any way to fix it. I told her honestly, maybe. It depended on whether my brother was willing to have a different kind of conversation than the one we'd been having for 2 years. It depended on whether his partner, who had been the real architect of most of what had happened, was going to remain in the picture. I told her I wasn't holding a grudge. I wasn't trying to destroy him. I had genuinely just wanted to protect what was mine, and to do it in a way that didn't require me to become the version of myself that would fight him in public and call him out in documents filed with a court. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, Your father would have done something like that. I didn't answer. I just held the phone and looked out the window at the street outside and thought about a man who had spent 19 years making sure his company could survive whatever came at it, who had buried provisions in footnotes not because he expected betrayal, but because he believed in preparation, who had, perhaps without knowing it, left me a set of tools I had spent 6 years learning how to use. The capital contribution deadline came and went. My brother could not raise the funds. His partner, it turned out, had his own liquidity issues and was not as willing to put in personal capital as he had been willing to put in advice. The contingent liability assumption triggered. An escrow requirement kicked in. My brother called me in week 7. It was the first time we'd spoken directly since the hearing. He said, I need your help. I said, I know. He said, I was wrong. I said, I know that too. What we worked out over the next 4 months was not a restoration of what we'd had before. That was gone. We both understood that. What we built instead was a different structure, one where my role was defined more specifically, where decision-making thresholds were explicit, where a third-party administrator would handle any disputes that reached deadlock. His partner left the picture entirely. I don't know what happened between them, and I didn't ask. My brother is not the person he was in the worst months of this. I don't think he was ever really that person. I think he got caught up in something that flattered his ambitions, and he made choices he can't fully walk back. We work together. We are careful with each other. Some days it feels almost like before. Most days it just feels like two people who understand each other's limits now. I have thought a lot about why I chose the path I chose. Why I didn't fight. Why I signed. Part of it was practical. A long legal battle over a mid-sized family business is not a story with winners. It's a story with two people who lose different amounts. Part of it was something harder to name. I had watched my brother spend 8 months trying to reduce me to an obstacle, to make me into the problem so that getting rid of me felt like a solution. And I thought, I don't want to spend the next year proving him wrong the way he would do it. I don't want to file documents that call him names. I don't want to win that way. I wanted to win by knowing more than he thought I knew. By having read the footnotes. By being the person my father made me, not the person my brother's lawyer was trying to describe in his filings. I also want to be honest. I was afraid. There were nights in those 8 months when I lay awake and ran the math on the worst-case scenarios and felt genuinely sick about it. There were days when I thought maybe I should just take the offer and walk away and start something new somewhere else and let him have the thing he wanted so badly. The reason I didn't was not confidence. It was my father's voice in my head saying, "Read the footnotes. Know what's in the agreement. Don't sign anything you haven't understood." I had understood it for years. The company is still running. Same warehouse outside of Columbus. Same pre-regional clients with 2 new ones added in the past year. The supply contracts are stable. The equipment is maintained. I go in on Tuesdays and Thursdays. My brother is there most days. We have a standing meeting at 9 on Wednesday mornings. We go through the numbers. We talk about what's coming. Sometimes we disagree. When we disagree, we go to the process we built. We don't go around each other. We don't slide things into stacks of papers. My mother comes to the warehouse sometimes on Friday afternoons. She sits in the front office and drinks coffee and looks at the framed photo of my father that's been there since 1987. She doesn't say much. She just likes to be in the space. I think my father would understand what happened, not be glad about it, but understand it. He was a man who believed that clarity protected everyone, that an honest structure was not a weapon but a foundation. He wrote those provisions not to trap someone, but to make sure the company would survive whoever came at it, including his own children. I am his daughter. I read the footnotes. I built on the foundation he left. That's not revenge. That's just inheritance. People ask me sometimes if I regret not fighting harder, not walking into that hearing room with a counterfiling, a damages claim, a strategy designed to take back everything that was being taken from me, and I understand why they ask. From the outside, it probably looked like surrender. It probably looked like I had decided I wasn't worth fighting for. But here's what I've come to understand about that year, and about everything that came after it. What my brother didn't start the night he slid a loan document into a stack of papers at 8 o'clock. It started much earlier, in the small decisions, the emails that stopped including me, the meetings that happened without my knowledge, the slow accumulation of choices that each felt minor but together added up to something deliberate. And what I didn't start the night I decided to sign. It started years earlier, in the hours I spent learning those footnotes, understanding those provisions, building the kind of knowledge that doesn't announce itself but is quietly, permanently there. That's the thing about cause and effect that people miss. We see the dramatic moments, the hearing, the signature, the lawyer going quiet, and we think that's where the story happened. But the story happened in the ordinary time, in the Tuesday afternoons reading compliance documents when no one asked me to, in the decision to document things not because I was planning for war, but because I believed in knowing where I stood. In the choice, when my brother was at his worst, not to become the worst version of myself in response. I'm not a patient person by nature. I want to be clear about that. There were nights in those 8 months when I was not calm or strategic or measured. There were nights I was just angry and scared and exhausted. What kept me from acting out of that anger wasn't virtue. It was the memory of my father saying, "Read the footnotes. Know what's in the agreement. Don't sign anything you haven't understood. Intelligence without integrity is just a faster way to hurt people. And integrity without intelligence is just goodwill that gets taken advantage of." I've watched both play out, sometimes in the same person, sometimes in the same week. What I've tried to build, imperfectly, with a lot of failures along the way, is the place where those two things meet, where you know enough to protect yourself and you're honest enough that your protection doesn't require destroying someone else. My brother and I work together now. It is not uncomplicated. There are Wednesdays when we sit across from each other in that 9 o'clock meeting, and I can feel the weight of what happened between us sitting in the room with us. We don't pretend it isn't there. We just keep going anyway. And I think that is its own kind of answer to the question of what matters. Not that things go right, not that people treat you the way you deserve, but that when they don't, when someone who should have been on your side decides to become your opponent, you find out what you're actually made of, whether you built something real inside yourself or whether you were just lucky until you weren't. I was lucky in one specific way. My father left me something more useful than the business. He left me the habit of preparation, the belief that clarity is a form of care, the understanding that knowing what you're signing is not paranoia, it's respect. For the agreement, for the other party, and for yourself. That's what I try to carry forward, not the outcome of that hearing, not the provisions or the clauses or the look on the lawyer's face when he found page 11, just the habit, the footnotes, the work done quietly, long before anyone is watching. That turns out to be the only thing that matters when everything else falls apart.